Welcome to DevOps Easy Learning. My name is Eric Patterson. Today I'm going to show you how to clone a GitHub repository. If you are not a subscriber yet, please go ahead and subscribe so that you don't have to miss any video on GitHub, because we are going to shoot a lot of video on GitHub and Git. So much talking, let's go and make the magic happen. Now, to clone a GitHub repository, it will depend on the type of repository that you have, right? To clone a GitHub repository, it will depend on the type of repository that you have. So the first thing that you need to do is, first of all, you go to your terminal, you make sure that you have Git installed, right? If you don't have Git installed, you can just type app install Git if you are on Ubuntu, or you type yum install Git if you are on stuff like CentOS, right? Right now, this is an Ubuntu virtual machine. I'm going to go ahead and type app install Git. Or you type sudo, because I am not root. Oh, it's telling me Git is being installed. If I type Git, you will see that Git is installed. Now that you have Git installed, now you need to go get the repository that you want to clone. But you have to pay attention. In GitHub, there are two types of repository. They are private repository and they are public repository. And the way we clone private repository is not the same way we clone public repository. Let's take, for example, this repository here called Chicken 03, right? And if you want to see all your repository, you can either click here. Git will show you your recent repository, or you can come down here, click here, you go to your repository, then you will see all your repository here. So let's pick, for example, this repository here. So let me go ahead and pick this repository here. Now, to clone the repository, as you can see, this is a public repository, right? To clone a repository, a public repository, right? It's simple, it's easy. If you want to work on a public repository, to clone a public repository, it's simple and it's easy. You just have to come to this guy here called code. You see here code. There's a drop-down menu here. You click on the drop-down menu. Now you have to clone either HTTPS, SSH, or GitHub CLI. Now, because this is a public repository, I can clone HTTPS, right? This is a public repository. I can clone HTTPS. So I will go ahead and click here. So when you click here, it will give you the URL. You go ahead, you click here. Now you go to your terminal and you type git clone. So if you want to clone something, you will type git clone, right? You type git clone to clone. So I will go ahead and hit enter. I will click, it will clone. Now, if I type ls, you will see that I have now that repository here called teaching, right? I have that repository here called teaching. Then if I do ls teaching, I will be able to see what is teaching, because a repository is a directory. If you watch my repository video where I explained that a repository was just a directory, right? That's why you see it there in terms of directory, right? As you can see, you have D here, say that this is a directory. So that's how you clone a public repository, right? That's how you clone a public repository. And anyone can clone a public repository. Anyone can clone a public repository. Now, you can also clone a repository, for example, and change the name, right? Let me do this. Let me remove this repository, or let me keep it this one here. Let's go get, for example, another repository, right? Let's take this repository for called teaching 2, right? I can come down here. But this one's not going to make a deal for us. Let's just take this one, teaching, right? I will take this repository here called teaching, right? I will come down here, click HTTPS. Now I'll go to my terminal. I can say git clone this, then I can rename, because in reality, when you say git clone, look at the last portion. You have the repository name .git, right? I can change this. I can say, okay, git clone, then I want to clone this into Ansible, for example. I can say git clone, then I put Ansible. Now, if I do this, it will clone, but it will rename the directory to Ansible for me, right? It will clone and will rename the directory to Ansible for me. We do this a lot, let's say, so that you can clone a repository multiple times by just changing the name, right? If I click there, when I do ls, you will not see teaching, but you will see Ansible, right? If I do ls, you will not see teaching, then you will see Ansible. So you can clone a repository and change the name, or you can clone it easily, and both work. This will work on the private or the public repository. Now, As you guys can see, to clone a public repository, we use git clone, and then we use the HTTPS, right? You click here, you copy the command here, right? No need of coming here and trying to do this. No, you have this here, copy URL. You have this copy to clipboard here. Now, what about the private repository, right? What about the private repository? Now, what about the private repository? Now, if a repository is private, it's different game. If a repository is private, you need a key. If you don't have your key added already to GitHub, you will not be able to clone private repository in your GitHub, right? You need the key added, right? For example, I have the key added. If I come down here under setting, then I go into this, you will see that I have my key added here, right? I have my key added here. So therefore, if I come down here into this private repository 01, I will be able to clone this. If I go here on SSH, I can clone this. If I say git clone, I'm able to clone. So I was able to clone private one because this user called Ubuntu, the user that I'm using right now called Ubuntu, have his key actually, right? The user called Ubuntu actually have his key in GitHub. Now, let's take a user that does not have the key on GitHub. I will go root, for example. I do sudo -i, I become root. The root user does not have his key in GitHub. Now, let's copy the same command and paste it there. If I copy this command, let's see what is going to happen. If I click here, I hit enter, it will say, hey, please make sure you have the correct access right. And, just this telling me I can't clone SSH. Why? Because actually I don't have my key, right? For private repository, I can't clone SSH. Why? Because I don't have my key there, right? Now, also one thing that I want you guys to pay attention about private repository, if I come down here on the private repository, I try to clone SSH, HTTPS, sorry, I try to clone HTTPS. Let's see what's going to happen. So if I say git clone, you will ask me for the username. Hey, I need to put my username. Why? Because I'm trying to clone HTTPS what? A private repository, right? If you clone, I'm trying to clone HTTPS, a private repository, right? I'm trying to clone this, HTTPS, a private repository. So keep it short, and to keep it simple. For public repository, you clone SSH. For public repository, you clone HTTPS. For private repository, you clone SSH. And where do you get the HTTPS or the SSH? You come down here, you go in the repository, you click on code, then you use this. If the repository is public, you use this, but if the repository is private, you use this. Now, how do you know when a repository is public or private? You check here, this is the repository name, then here it tells you if the repository is private or public. Now, be mindful. The fact that you have your key on GitHub doesn't mean you can clone all private repository on GitHub. You can only clone private repository in your GitHub, meaning that if you go to somebody else's account, you will not be able to clone a private repository from somebody else's account because you don't have the access right, for example. So it's always valuable for your own account. So thank you for watching the video. If you are not subscribed yet, please do so. You can also follow us on Twitter, on TikTok, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. So if you are not, if you just go to those platforms like communication platform or those social media platform and type DevOps Easy Learning, you'll be able to fetch us there. And this is our logo. See you guys on the next video. It was a pleasure having you guys around.